Hello and welcome to Humans of Reliability with me, Ashley from Rootly. And today I'm joined by Matt Gowie, who's the CEO and CTO. We love a technical leader at Masterpoint, where their team partners with growing engineering orgs to help get control of infrastructure as code. Matt is somewhat of an infrastructure as code expert, which you will definitely see in this episode. But Matt, I'm going to toss it over to you to introduce yourself and say hi.
Yeah, that was great. Nice to be here. Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, I wear a bunch of hats. So say CEO and CTO. Really, I run the business, and I have a team of people who they help me get everything done. But we like to say that we help our clients automate, migrate, and really implement best practices within infrastructure as code. Really focused on Terraform and OpenTofu. That's what I
Perfect.
do.
And we are going to dive deep into Terraform and OpenTofu and some fun stuff. But first, this is the Humans of Reliability show. So we've got to touch a little bit on the reliability and incident response side of things, which I know you do have experience with. And one thing the audience always loves to hear is a good incident story. So I'd love to know if there's any incidents you've been a part of that were particularly memorable for you.
The one that I always think about as the most memorable is I had an incident while I was camping where I was on call. Shouldn't have been camping. I was primary, but I was basically primary on call all the time because I ran a small team, and we were running a data warehouse at an acquired startup that I worked at, and our HBase primary node went down. And to me and the system, that was a big deal, and it caused like a cascading set of failures. And I, of course, was out in the middle of nowhere at Smith Rock in Oregon, climbing. And of course, this happened at 2 a.m. in the morning, and it was very, very cold in the middle of the fall. And I ended up actually doing all of the work, which it was probably a 20-hour incident where I was like working on this, doing all of the work both from a bench where I was plugging my computer into a pole next to the bathroom, and on a hotspot with my phone, and then also from my car because I got so cold at a certain point that I needed to change locations and go into somewhere where I had some heat coming my way because my fingers aren't able to type. But we had customers calling us during that incident, saying that their systems were broken, and it really was a debacle. I have some friends who would very very quickly want to like go and grab a beer if we were to go and talk about it because it was one of our worst, and I definitely grew a lot as that one. But yeah, that's the short version. A fun one.
Yeah, that feels all too familiar. I actually just shared an almost similar story on Reddit 'cause there's a thread going. I don't know if you're ever in the SRE subreddit, but there's a thread going right now about just, gnarly incident stories. And that reminds me of a time I was technically not primary on call, but when you've been on a team for a certain amount of time, you kind of are always on call because things are going to get escalated and sent
Hmm.
through. And similar thing, it was a Sunday. I was blissfully laptop free on the New York City subway, about to head into Midtown and do some shopping with my friends. So, of course, no cell service when you're underground somewhere between Brooklyn and Midtown. And I popped up and my phone was just exploding. And the poor primary on call at the time, it turned out to be the really big GCP outage in 2019.
Oh.
And the on call at the time, poor guy, he was quite new and just basically kind of had a panic and tapped out. And the secondary was doing their best and they were in over their head. And everyone from like our infra team to our PR team was like calling me, trying to be like, we need you to get in here. Where are you? And, similar thing. We got through it. It was not great.
Hmm.
But, we did actually get a lot of good resourcing after that to have a more sustainable on-call rotation, maybe onboard a bit better and stuff. So it got us on the attention of the C-suite, which meant we got some money and resources, but it was not the most fun way to get there. So I definitely empathize with that. I was like on stolen Wi-Fi, I think in the Urban Outfitters on Fifth, just like they were probably like,
That's
what
great.
are you doing? Just kind of furiously tapping.
Yeah.
Yeah, fun times.
Fun times. Yeah, they're probably the moments where we, get the most camaraderie and like team building, but also there's a high level of stress that comes with them, and yeah. Anyway, I can fully empathize and fully hear where you're coming from.
Yeah, if you haven't had one of those as a SRE yet, hopefully you never will, but if you do, you're in good company.
Yeah.
So I do want to make sure we talk a lot about infrastructure as code, as that is your area of expertise. And I thought I'd just start maybe a little zoomed out for folks who might be watching but might not be super familiar with it. Like, can you give a high level, what is infrastructure as code and what does it have to do with reliability? How do those two things relate to each other?
Yeah, infrastructure as code is the means by which you can, you know, write some code to basically provision your infrastructure and manage all the resources that you create in the cloud or on-prem. So instead of clicking through some console for AWS or DigitalOcean or Azure, you can write code that will enable you to say, hey, I want a server to be this size. I want it to be connected to this load balancer. I want connections to go through this DNS name. How it relates to reliability, it's really important. What it comes down to is, hey, if you're not writing it down in some very succinct way, then that knowledge ends up getting kept with one person, and they're the person who knows how to provision that infrastructure, those resources. But if it's written down in infrastructure as code, then you have the ability to just say, hey, provision this thing again. Like let's say a database gets destroyed and deleted out of the console for some reason, and you don't know all the configuration parameters that you need to do to that you need to go through the console and actually create that. If it's in infrastructure as code, it's in IAC, then it's a terminal command away. So I think it's really important for like SREs to be able to use infrastructure as code as a means by which to create repeatable systems and not have all of that locked into documentation or people's heads.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great overview. And at Really, we even have, a Terraform provider. So you can store your entire Really configuration within Terraform files. You can use that to have, like for some of our really large enterprise customers, they might have an entire staging sandbox environment just for their Really configuration, that they can really easily roll out changes to. And then recreate that environment elsewhere using Terraform. It's really really valuable feature and it's massively popular for us.
Yeah, and I love that. Just to highlight that really quick, I have a one client that we do production support work for, and we use Opsgenie. And I've actually been looking at really as like a potential swap because while Opsgenie does have some Terraform support, I think you folks are like vastly superior in that regard. So something that was been on my mind just because it feels like that could be a good switch.
Yeah, well, thank you. We can definitely talk more about that offline.
Yeah.
But yeah, our Terraform provider is something we put a ton of resources in. We do even have a Terraformer. You can auto generate those Terraform files. We put a lot of time into that. But would you say the IAC then is something that's only relevant at a certain scale, or like when and how can a company tell that infrastructure as code is something they should start thinking about?
Yeah, scale is a good way of saying it. I think that this, it's of course it's a depends answer. I think that IAC should be used way earlier because it really creates documentation for the next person who's taking over that system, or it decreases your bus problem, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, I think that if you're a small startup and you're doing your proof of concept, then you should probably be using Heroku or something along those lines, right? If you open up the can of worms that is GCP or AWS, you can like easily shoot yourself in the foot. But as soon as you get into AWS or GCP or Azure or any of the cloud ecosystems, or yeah, I think at that point you're really it's critical to have IAC because you're creating the documentation, you're creating the repeatability that you need for your product long term.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like a lot of things, right? Where, like, some would even argue having an incident management program isn't necessary at a startup. It's only once you reach a certain scale and complexity. But what we find is the people who start early have a much easier time scaling that program. And there's usually some sort of kind of low lift beginner implementation of something that just gives you enough that as you scale, it becomes a much lighter lift to actually get value out of that thing. Like once you hit a certain scale that you really need it, it becomes very difficult to implement. But luckily, there's folks like Masterpoint out there who I'm sure can help with that.
Yeah, I think that you're kind of damned if you don't. Maybe you're damned if you do in a certain way because you'll start with training wheels on, but it's always good to start with something. So I agree with what you're saying for sure.
So before our conversation, I did a little bit of digging to see in the IAC world and in DevOps, like what are the conversations going on? What are the questions people are asking about infrastructure as code? And one thing I stumbled upon was digging into Terraform versus OpenTofu. And when you start Googling and looking on Reddit at the comparisons between those two things, one of the first things I found that came up that I thought was kind of funny in the DevOps subreddit, which I like to frequent, was it was a poll asking, are people planning to migrate from Terraform to OpenTofu? And the most popular answer by far, even within this group of DevOps practitioners, was I have no idea. Like people just really didn't know. Should they? Will they? So I'm wondering, when it comes to OpenTofu specifically, I know a lot of people are interested in it. Do you have any general advice for folks unsure about whether or not they should be making that migration?
I get this question all the time. I think that it's becoming more and more relevant as, just time is going on and the OpenTofu project has grown a lot. I really think that OpenTofu has a lot of traction. Like they have a solid team, they have a good amount of funding. They're really putting their money where their mouth is in terms of sticking to a particular release cadence and building some new features. They're doing really well in proving out what their uh, what their capabilities are and how that they can, keep up with Terraform. And I think that for people that are making that decision, it comes down to optionality for me. Most of the open source tools that are out there, Atlantis and TerraGrunt and different tools that are within the IAC ecosystem around Terraform, they now support OpenTofu because it's very easy to support OpenTofu for them. And when your options are Terraform and your only way of automating Terraform is write your own pipelines, use Atlantis or Terraform Cloud versus OpenTofu, where you can use everything but Terraform Cloud. I think that the obvious solution or the obvious, answer to me is like, hey, go with the thing where you have more optionality, the thing that's actually open source that doesn't require money to be paid for, somebody to be using it within their product and be providing those pipelines. It comes down to, where you find value in your tooling. But I think OpenTofu is definitely something that's worth looking into and like really evaluating because it's gotten the legs right now that I think it's, worth the switch or worth starting new projects with for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great overview of it. So, one other question I have on my mind is totally not related to work, but I'm curious about it because when we were chatting, I discovered that you are a pretty avid climber. You are Colorado based. So naturally, are there people in Colorado who don't climb rocks? Because I have yet to meet them.
I think there are, but I think that they've at least tried climbing or they know more about it than the average person. But yeah,
It's only a matter
it's a
of time
funny thing.
before they're chased out of the state.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, tell us about climbing. Do you have like a bucket list climb or any favorite climbs so far?
I have a bunch of favorite climbs so far. I mean, I really love alpine climbing. I've been, climb a bunch in Rocky Mountain National Park. I just had like a long 24-hour day on Saturday, actually climbing a famous route on the Diamond. I've traveled to Wyoming and the Pacific Northwest and a lot of really good places. But yeah, bucket list climb. There's a route in Patagonia that I would really love to go and do. It's kind of it would require a lot of work. So maybe one day. And I've never climbed in South America, so that's definitely of interest. But that's kind of what's on my mind.
Man, it's crazy how huge the Rocky Mountain Range is. Like I grew up near the Rocky Mountain Range in such a different part of the world, like in the Pacific
Yeah.
Northwest and southern BC. And just remembering how far it extends down into the US is kind of mind blowing.
Yeah, and actually one of the places that's like really high on my list of things to do is in the Bugaboos. The Becky Chenard route in the Bugaboos is like world famous, like a top 50 in the North America. So I really would love to get further north in the Rockies because there's a lot of beauty and amazing climbing up there too.
Oh, it's gorgeous. It's one of those things you take for granted growing up there, and then now that I'm out east, I'm like, wow, there are no mountains, there's no ocean. Like, the more you travel, the more you realize how, at least for me, like, growing up in the Pacific Northwest area, it seemed so boring as a kid, and then you leave and you go through adulthood and you wind up in Ontario and you realize how spectacular the mountain really is out there.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. I was just in Squamish,
Ah,
just 2 weeks ago, and yeah, it's amazing. Like the whole coast and the rock climbing out there is incredible.
awesome. So that's pretty much all I have in terms of questions today. But one thing I do at the end of every episode is I always invite my guests to tell us what they have going on. I don't know if you're going to be at any conferences coming up, any events or exciting things, or if you just want to tell us a bit more about Masterpoint, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I'll likely be at AWS reInvent. I haven't bought my tickets yet because I'm dragging my feet, but I'll be there. And then, yeah, in terms of what to do to check out Masterpoint, check out our website. It's masterpoint.io. We have a blog, we have a newsletter, and if you're dealing with any problems with infrastructure as code, please reach out. We always love to chat. I can always provide some free advice. And, if it goes past that and we end up helping you out with some implementation or helping you out with some migration, we're always, eager to help our clients be happy at the end of the day. So get in touch.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Matt, for chatting with me today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Ashley.
Awesome. Well, we will see you soon and catch more episodes of Humans of Reliability on the site here.